I want to discuss with you here the basic violations of opening principles today, which is development. Now, development in the opening, it's like learning alphabet before you start reading. You need to learn alphabet, so that's why you have to learn things about development. And you should not violate this rule in the opening, and if your opponent does, you have to know how to go to punish him, what to do to punish him, and how you use the right judgment for punishment and how to think about it. So let's look at few examples. Well, the example one we're going to take in the game of between two top grandmasters of that time, between Larsen, who was one of the greatest GMs in the history of the game, and Boris Spassky, who was obviously one of the top players in the world for a number of years, and he was world champion too. Okay, let's look at that game. This game took in a match USSR versus the rest of the world, and Larsen was white. Larsen knows, obviously, he doesn't have to be explained about the basic rules, but he liked to bend a little bit too much to violate some of the principles of the game. He liked to do that, and he actually invented some new principles as well. So he was extremely talented, innovative, and creative player. But look that when you are creative and you start doing something new that has never been done, it's not gonna go smooth every time. And do something of suspicious value against the player of Spassky's caliber will not go unpunished. B3, that's the opening Larsen used to play for quite frequently. E5, bishop B2, knight C6, C4, knight F6, knight F3. Now this is provocative move number one. E4. Now white is asking for it. Black pushes, and white makes the second move with the same piece in the opening. Bishop C5, knight takes C6. Again, we talked about this on a previous tape, on earlier tapes, that taking white made one knight F3 move, the other knight D4 move, and then third knight takes C6. Three moves with the piece that captures the piece that made only one move. Right now, after D takes C, you can notice, and this bishop is developed too, so you can notice that already white is significantly behind in development. Now, E3, bishop to F5. Black is beautifully developed and preparing to castle on the queen side and attack on king side. Queen C2 and queen E7, clearly preparing the castle long. Bishop E2, and as expected, black castles long, and white goes F4. Now why F4? Because if white castles now, black has great chances to start kingside attack with H5, bishop D6, maybe H4, H3, or G5, G4, or maybe even bishop G4. And after white castles, if they go after h5, f4, obviously white is gonna open position with g5, and files will be opened on king side. So Larsen decided to wait with the castling and go f4 immediately. Black goes knight g4. Now this is directly aimed for king side. Now this knight is very pasty, so it's very difficult to get rid of this knight. Now white doesn't want to take the knight because bishop is gonna take, and now white controls all the white squares, including d3 square for the rook. But on the other hand, you cannot attack this knight, because after h3, queen h4, white can instantly resign, because on king d1, knight f2 check, and king f1 will lead to a checkmate. So the move was made by black is g3, stopping queen h4 check, and preparing h3 for a next move. Now after g3, black goes h5. And now white is in serious trouble. In trouble because h4 is a threat to open the h file. So white goes h3, and black plays shocking h4. Now white is paying big price for delayed development and having king in the center. Pawn takes g4, and pawn takes g3. And now we see that black is totally lost. All needed here, couple of accuracies and couple of final blows by black, which were perfectly delivered by Spassky. White cannot play rook takes h8, because after rook takes h8, there is a rook h1 check threat that white has no defense from. So the move was played by white was rook g1, and now rook to h1. That's a killer, instant killer move. Rook takes h1 and pawn to g2. And you can see that if white goes rook g1, then queen h4 check, and after king d1, there is a queen h1, and it's all over. So in this position, after g2 move, white played rook f1, and black played queen h4 check. King d1 is forced. Pawn takes rook check, making a queen. Bishop takes f1. Bishop takes g4, and game ended. It's a mate in a couple of moves after king c1 and queen e1 check. And you see, this is like on the world's highest level, the game. And even the strongest players have to obey the basic rules. And Larsen did not in this game. And you see the game ended, he got practically checkmated. And you see the knight on b1, rook on a1, bishop on b2, and queen on c2. They are totally out of play. They are absolute spectators of a disaster. So that's how game ended. This is very, very significant and very, very powerful game played by black. And I should say a lot of credit has to be given to white for poor judgment and poor play. So next example I want to show you is very interesting to some extent. It's an opening that I widely publicized on my previous tapes in a Scotch Gambit. But Scotch Gambit is a very positional opening, but there is a couple of sub-variations that black can play. e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, d4, ed, bishop c4. And in this position, normally black should play either knight f6, which is Scotch Gambit, or bishop c5, that is gioco piano. And in both cases, in my opinion, white has some advantage. However, there is another line that in both cases, actually, in the openings in moves I just mentioned, bishop c5 and knight f6, white eventually gets its pawn back. But if black plays bishop b4 check, white is not going to get their pawn back. White is going to be pawned down whole game. And let's see what's going to come out of it. Why is it so good for white? And why is not recommended to play bishop b4 check? We go pawn c3, pawn takes c3, and now theory does recommend castle for white, which is okay move, but what I like very much is pawn takes c3. And now, in my opinion, black is in serious trouble. Black is in serious trouble. There is no immediate threat. The bishop is hanging. There is no immediate threat after bishop moves. But where should bishop go? There are four acceptable retreats from the bishop, by the bishop. Bishop a5, bishop c5, bishop d6, and bishop e7. Bishop a5 is the main continuation. All other moves are a lot worse. So let's leave the last continuation, bishop a5, for the end, and let's look at the other three. Bishop d6 should not be seriously considered because black is slightly behind in development, and after bishop d6 they're making case a lot worse. They're stopping development of the light square bishop on c8. So what we have left two moves beside bishop a5. It's bishop c5 and bishop e7. We're quickly going to remove both of them from our observation, because on bishop c5, white quickly gets its pawn back and white has advantage in development. Bishop takes f7 check, king takes f7, queen d5 check, and next move queen is going to take on c5, and material is even, black cannot castle, and black is in trouble. So that eliminates bishop c5. Much worse is going to happen if bishop goes to e7. Then we're going to violate one of the basic principles of the game, develop the queen in early stage, but we're going to do it for the sake of mating black, so that's okay. That's a good excuse. After queen d5, game is over, because queen takes f7. There is no defense. Because on knight h6, simply bishop takes h6. So the bishop a5 is the only acceptable move in this position. So in this position, we just castle. Now, black is going to do okay if they can castle eventually, but they cannot castle. We are not going to let black castle in this position. How? What can they play? They can play knight e7 and then castle. Try to go knight f6 and then castle, and then try to go d6. d6 is the only acceptable move. Now here is why. On knight e7, knight g5 is a killer. And why is it a killer? Because we are attacking f7 pawn. f7 pawn is attacked. Black has two continuations. Castle or knight to e5. They are both equally bad. After knight e5, white has very pleasant choice. Pleasant choice is knight takes f7, knight takes f7, bishop takes f7, check, king takes f7, now queen h5 check, and whatever black does, next move, queen takes a5, equal pawns and black's king is exposed. This is good for white, but white can do even better than this. White can do even better, here is the position, by playing simply bishop b3. Now this move is a lot stronger than it may seem. And if black plays h6, now f4. H takes g, f takes e, it's a total disaster for black. There is f7 pawn hangs, and if black castles, that's the only way to protect f7, then queen h5, followed by bishop g5, and game will be over in next 2-3 moves. Okay, so we decided that knight e7 is bad. Knight f6 is also bad, obviously, because of e5. So the only acceptable move is d6. And now black wants to play knight to f6 and castle. They are 2 moves away from the full happiness, but this will never they will never make it. After d6, bishop is on c4. In this position, white plays queen to b3, attacking f7 pawn, which black can easily protect. So the best way to defend it is queen e7. Now white goes e5, and this is a killing move. Black cannot develop, and also black cannot allow white to take pawn on d6, because that will enable white to put rook on e1. So in this position, black has to capture e5 pawn. They have to do it with the pawn. Again, knight takes e5 is bad, because knight takes e5. Now, if queen takes e5, then bishop takes f7. And if pawn takes e5, then queen b5 check wins black bishop on a5. So that means that black has to capture e5 pawn with the pawn. And now black is again 2 moves away from castling. But here, white keeps developing, and black keeps going around without getting any help in development. Bishop to a3, attacking black's queen. Black queen has to move, and black queen has to keep an eye on f7 square. Queen f6. And now white brings the last minor piece into the game. Knight to d2. You see knight e4 is coming next. Black goes knight e7, and black is as close as ever to castling. Castle is next move they want to do. Here comes knight to e4, queen g6, and after bishop takes e7, it's all over. Now, let's go quickly through the choices black has here. Choice 1, knight takes e7. What we can do, we can go knight e to g5, attacking f7. He forced to castle, no other move. And now knight takes f7, rook takes f7, knight takes e5, the end. Okay, let's go quickly through the other possibilities. King takes f7, we cannot seriously consider for black, because after queen a3 check, king e8, rook e1, now we know he is never gonna castle. Not in this game anyway. So queen this is out of question. And the last move is queen takes e4. That's white has very deadly continuation here. And a very deadly continuation is simple. Bishop goes back to a3. And now the bishop on a3 is like an X-ray bishop. It completely controls this diagonal. f7 pawn hangs, and after queen g6, rook e1, it's just a matter of very few moves until black is going to get checkmated. It's just blown away. So this position is over. Or even knight takes e5 is very powerful, because after knight takes e5, just imagine what can happen after queen a4, queen b5 check, attacking almost every piece on the board, and after knight c6, rook e1 check. Just this, look at this picture. Every one of white's pieces attacking every one of black's pieces. Black does not have a prayer here. Check, and after bishop e6, queen takes b7, and black is gonna lose like 4 or 5 pieces in the next few moves. Everything is over. So that's why, so black was way behind in development. They went in the opening part of the game pawn hunting, and when you do that and you play against a reasonably strong player, you do not get away. And some people play like this in the earlier stage of their career, and they get away several times, and they keep playing it. It's like a little child. When he does something, some bad things, and gets away with it, he keeps doing it until he gets punished. So once they get smacked, they will stop doing it. That's why it's very, very important for you to help those people by killing them once or twice. Then they're going to stop doing this. It's good for them. They're going to learn something. It's good for you. You're going to score points. So everybody is happy. So let's go to the other example. e4, e5, knight f3, f5. Now, can this be recommended for black seriously? No. No, because this is violation of every rule we stand. Now, they go f5, they opening position, they opening their king position, they're not developing, knight takes e5, now threatening queen h5 check, so queen f6 is a theoretical move. And the move I like in this position, there are a lot of ways to get an advantage for white, but the move I like is knight to c4. Now, if he plays pawn takes e4, we go knight c3. We attack the e4 pawn. Queen g6 is the way to protect it. Now we go pawn d3. We attack this pawn again. Now, if black takes the d3 pawn, we take it with the bishop. And black takes on g2. Let's summarize the situation here. White has 3 pieces developed. Black has 1 queen developed. How many pieces does black has developed? 0. Not 0, minus, because queen on g2 is going to cost them more time to waste to get back. This is a totally lost position, because if nothing else, we can go bishop e4, protect the rook, king h1. Now queen e2, threatening discover check, and if black defends, bishop e7, then bishop f4, and castle long. Just take a look at this position. White has everything developed, black has nothing developed. Is it worth one pawn? If you think it's worth a pawn, if you think that black is okay, you are in the wrong business. Choose different game. So this is over. So this is another way of punishing. We are not gonna, I'm not gonna teach you here how to finish the position where you have every piece developed and your opponent has nothing developed. This is something you have to learn, those kind of things, from different sources. So let's look at the position. I have here the very famous variation of Zemish, King's Indian, knight c3, bishop g7, e4, d6. This was a game that I played several years ago against one of the American GMs. And f3, castle, bishop e3, c5. This is very famous. Pawn sacrifice, d takes c, queen takes d8, rook takes d8, bishop takes c5, knight c6. White has an extra pawn. That's a pawn sacrifice, and it's very double-edged. So what happened in this game? White played knight d5. It's still part of the opening. Knight takes d5, pawn takes d5, b6, bishop a3, knight d4. Now obviously on bishop takes e7 will be rook e8, and bishop moves back, knight c2. Now you may think, what is this position after knight d4? Black is pawn down, they have better development. But you may say, wait a minute, that rule does not apply to the endgame positions, because queens are off the board, and that's not true. If queens are off the board, that does not make it endgame, because we still have enough pieces on the board to consider this position as a middle game position. This is 100% middle game position. And after knight d4, white castled long, black goes e6, and taking on e6 is not good for white, because bishop takes e6, and black has absolutely dominating development with rook c8 check next move. So the bishop e7 is the one possibility in this position, and knight e2 is the other possibility in this position. And this is still theory, still opening. This is known in the modern theory. Knight e2, that's the way white protects d5 pawn. Now if black takes on e2, bishop takes e2, and rook protects d5 pawn. So what black does is plays knight b5, bishop, and now bishop on a3 is hanging, which is not, it's very dangerous for white if black takes the bishop on a3, and bishop e7 has to be played. Black goes rook d7, and this is theoretical position. My opponent failed to make correct move, which is bishop to g5, and instead he played d6, pawn d6. This is a bad move, and after this move, white is in trouble. Now let's see, why can white be in trouble? Their development is maybe the same way as black's. Black goes bishop e5, and now white sees that black simply wants to take the pawn back on d6 and have a better position. So white plays f4, bishop takes d6, and now if bishop takes on d6, knight takes d6. Now you see that white is way behind in development. Now the pawn is hanging on e4, bishop is going to go to b7 and rook d8. And white did not even develop the king side yet. So in this position, white decided to play bishop f6 and offers a draw. Bishop is on c8, and they offer a draw because, well, actually black played bishop b7, that's what white anticipated, and now e5. And here white was thinking that since this bishop is pinned on d6, black has to play rook c7 check, and after king b1, move the bishop on f8, and then knight g3, and white somehow concludes development. But that's not so. Before white concludes development, white creating one threat to the bishop on d6. Now, we do not have to play rook c7 check. What happened in this position is not rook c7 check, but rook c8 check. Now this move looks like a mistake, because after king b1, black's dark square bishop is in trouble. But in reality, black has a mating attack in this position. Now, white is way behind in development, and every one of black's pieces is ready to strike. Knight a3 check. This was unexpected shot, very powerful and decisive. Pawn has to take on a3, and here comes second blow. Bishop takes e5. Black attacks white's rook on d1, and white cannot take this rook on d7 because bishop e4 is amazingly checkmate position. Rook d3 has to interpose, and bishop takes d3, that's a checkmate. White king cannot move anywhere. So this is the position after black played bishop takes e5. So white has no choice, play bishop takes e5, rook takes d1, and king b2. This is a very strong position for black. White is doing very well materially. They have knight and a bishop for a rook. But they have problem. The problem is king. The problem is development. The problem is frozen king side. And problem is their position totally lost. What happened here is I played bishop e4. Now this actually was played rook d1, rook d2 check first, king a1, and now bishop e4 is extremely powerful move in anticipation of white's response, which is knight c3. White cannot play knight g3 because rook c1 is simple checkmate, and after knight c3 comes cute but not very difficult conclusion of the game. Rook takes c3, bishop takes c3, rook d1 check, king b2, and rook to b1 checkmate. Now, why is this a good example for violation of the opening development rules? You see white's, the final position is a checkmate. Final position, white's king side is undeveloped. You cannot, if you cannot get checkmated, white, your pieces are not developed. This is a sign of a very, very bad player or player that grossly violated basic principles, which mostly bad players do. Well, but we saw even players of Larsen's caliber did, and I don't want to name the player I played this game against. It's another American, very well-known grandmaster that played like this, and he also got punished probably nearly the same way that Larsen was, for same reason anyway. So now let's go back and let's look at another very, very familiar, very thematic example. d4, knight f6, bishop g5. This game was played also against two famous Russian grandmasters. Bishop g5, c5. Unfortunately, neither one of them is alive now. But chess principles were 45, 50, or 60 years ago were exactly the same as they are now. That did not change, and it's not going to change in the next few hundred years. Well, theory is going to shape, it's going to change, it's going to be updated, but principles going to stay the same because there is only right or wrong principles. So right principles has not been updated in last 100 years or so. So after d takes c, knight e4, bishop f4, and knight c6. Black is developing. Now here's white got greedy. What they want to do, black of course in the last move could have taken white's pawn on c5. And then position is almost equal and it's quiet, and we would have seen maybe another 40 moves without big developments. However, when black played knight c6, normal developing move, white got greedy, and they don't want to give this pawn anymore. They want to hang on to this pawn, and queen d5 attacks the knight, protects the pawn, and they thought that black has to play queen a5 check, but then c3, and taking on c5 with the knight will go to b4. So, and white thinks that, okay, now after queen d5 they have an extra pawn. Here is the unpleasant surprise number one. Instead of taking the pawn, which black could have done on the last move, they give another pawn. They offer another pawn, f5. Now they want to go e6 next move and play bishop takes c5. So now white is practically forced to take the pawn on f5. And here black goes d5, supporting the knight and attacking the queen. Queen h5 check, g6. Queen h4. Now you see it's already 3 moves made by white queen. This cannot be tolerated, and this has to be punished. In my opinion, I like the way black played in this game, but I don't think it's the only way to play. I think black has here multiple ways to play this position. The way I like is bishop g7 followed by queen a5, and then after bishop g7 maybe castle and going e5. That's good. Black, however, played direct threats right away. Black wants to take white apart right now. They go knight to d4, and we see that knight takes c2 is threatening, and there is no good way to defend. On knight a3, for example, and queen a5 check, and I don't know what can white do here. So white played bishop e5, knight takes c2, king d1, knight takes a1, bishop takes h8, and queen a5. You see that white's position is totally ruined. They have no development, no material, everything is hanging. You can close the case right now. Also, black is threatening queen a4 check, and on b3 something like knight c3 check, followed by queen takes queen. So the position is totally hopeless. In a few games, in a few moves, game was over. We don't have to see the kind of how it ended, because there are many ways to end this position for white, for black. So now let's go and look at the next very, very instructive example of pawn hunting and development neglecting case. d4, f5, Dutch opening, knight f3, knight f6. Now here I developed one system that I like very much myself, and I use it all the time. Bishop g5, knight e4. That's knight e4 is one continuation, and the other option is pawn to e6. On pawn to e6, I like to play knight d2, and after bishop e7, bishop takes f6, bishop takes f6, and e4. But talking about this position, it's more like an opening issue. It's more like basically talking about the Dutch opening. That's not what we want to do now. Our topic is how can you violate development rules. Knight e4, pawn h4. Now, white doesn't mind to give g5 bishop, but if black takes on g5, then h file will be open, and this is good for white. So the correct move, according to theory, here is a c5, and that's what played by my opponent. Now I went e3, and he played queen b6. Now this looks good for black, because they say if the b2 pawn is hanging, if I go b3 or queen c1, then he can go e6. You see, queen is not on d8 anymore, and white cannot recapture the queen. And then black has reasonably good position. But don't forget, queen b6 is a move with the queen in early stage of the opening. This is somewhat violation of the rule. So what I did, I played simply knight to c3 and totally ignored b2 pawn, on which my opponent played queen takes b2. Now I played knight takes e4, pawn takes e4. I have to tell you this, that the game ended real quick, but it's not something that I invented in the middle of the game, during the game. That's something I prepared even before game started. So knight d2. Now black has an extra pawn, and they just won second pawn. And what does white do? How do they handle the situation in the center? White simply plays bishop c4. Black plays d takes e and f takes e. Now let's look at this position. White is 2 pawns down. Black has no pieces developed. white has every piece developed. All they have to do is to castle and bring the queen out. The rest, it's like a game that plays by itself. And this position now, if black plays e6, or whatever black tries here, black is going to be busted in very few moves. For instance, e6, white simply castles. And you notice that bishop on g5 controls diagonal from g5 to d8, and bishop on g5 cannot be pushed away, because after h6, believe it or not, queen h5 is a checkmate. So this bishop on g5 is kind of permanent there. White cannot touch it. And if black plays d5, I would say, I don't know now exactly what would I have done, but I believe in overwhelming advantage here for white, and I have several good ways to go. Right. Well, first of all, now knight takes e4 may be very good. If black takes either one of these pieces, queen d8 checkmate. Well, the other very good continuation is on d5 is queen h5 check, and after g6 maybe simply retreat the queen to g4, because now we created a new threat of bishop f6. So there are many ways to take advantage of this overwhelming position. Probably the best move is knight c6. Then I can play maybe knight takes to e4. And after d5, I don't know, maybe knight f6 is decisive. It's a check, and if pawn takes on f6, bishop takes on f6, followed by queen h5 check. Queen is hanging, rook is hanging, queen is hanging, and queen h5 check is coming. Black is totally hopeless. On top of it, bishop takes d5 may be also very strong. Pawn takes d5, and queen takes d5. Now we're threatening queen f7 check. You know, sometimes this position, you don't have to see exactly where you're going to checkmate your position, your opponent. You see one piece, queen on d5, the other piece, the third piece, and the fourth piece. 4 pieces attacking black's king. 1 piece protects. There can be absolutely no hope for defense. And don't forget, there is a 5th piece of white, rook on a1, is ready to actively participate in direct attack. So black is totally hopeless here. So instead of developing in early stage, you see the queen on b2, that cost them 3 tempos. Black spent 3 moves to take the most important piece away from defense for the price of 2 pawns. Not for the price of to get 2 pawns. So that's a bad idea, and this is the good punishment. So keep this in mind, and I hope you make the right conclusion from everything we discussed now. Thank you very much.